Hey, so Champions Cup semi-final weekend is fast approaching. Leinster Northampton on Saturday, and then for the neutral, Bordeaux Toulouse on the Sunday is probably the game. We will cast our eye back as well. Irish rugby in crisis. Disappointing weekend for Irish rugby though. Distinct chance now of just 2 provinces in the Champions Cup next year, which actually is, when you stop and think about it, fairly grim. And then the Irish women's team signed off this year's Six Nations in defeat. For UL Bohemian and Clontarf, there was the Energy AL happiness at the Aviva Stadium. And of course, our rugby coverage on Indosport is brought to you by Energia. They sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels. Grassroots with the Energia AAL. They are the official energy partner to Leinster Connacht, the Irish men's and women's teams. And their Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion, welcoming everybody of all abilities to participate in the game. And if you want to learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships, then energia.ie/rugby the place to go. They also have an exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans as well. Cian Tracy to my left, hello.
Hello, Joe.
And Rory O'Connor after his week off, hello.
Hello, Joe.
Well, for some.
Ah, yeah.
In the dream. I'll go to La Rochelle. I'll take a week off. I'll come back.
Didn't go to Bordeaux. Let Cian have a trip to France.
You did.
Refreshed, and Irish rugby fell apart and I was away, but apart from that, all good.
Centrally contracted, the minutes are being managed, Joe, for a big finish of the season.
Well, let's cast an eye back before we preview this Champions Cup semi-final weekend. All 4 provinces lost the first time since
March
12th,
2015.
2015. I swear when I read that in your piece, I thought, God, that must be 3-4 years. Oh, it's 10 years.
Yeah.
March 15. So 10 years.
Paul O'Connell won his 100 cap in a defeat to Wales 7 days later. So that's the kind of time period. Joe Schmidt they were denied a Grand Slam in the penultimate round of Six Nations. That's the caveat with that stat, because they would have all been contributing to the Ireland team at that point and would have all been down bodies. So it was kind of I'd say there was no mention of it in podcasts around that time, because it wasn't
Probably wasn't no podcast, it was so long ago.
Certainly wasn't an indoor sport anyway.
Leinster will give a pass to. Or it's a lot of mitigation. Munster losing Cardiff, Ulster lose to the Sharks, who, when they're in the mood, to be fair, talented, but Ulster from a winning position again lose, and then Connacht, very disappointing. So we're back to your interim era in broad terms problem, aren't we? Like these 3 provinces are just not going well.
Yeah, I think Ulster are kind of getting it together and looked quite good at times, but don't have the squad. It's partly the interim era, and it's also like the quality of player that's available, because the teams are all at the point now where everyone's strong. It's the best time of the year for club rugby because everyone's strong and everyone's got something to play for. And Munster Cardiff was a pretty good game, and Cardiff pitched up despite the fact that they were gone into bankruptcy 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And
great atmosphere. There was a real sense of
it was a really good advertisement for the URC. Yeah. So you got to perform. And at the end of the day, when I was thinking back this morning to my season preview, I think Munster lost too much X factor last season, at the end of last season, and didn't replace it. So they lost Orgy Snyman, Antoine Frisch and Simon Zebo from their squad. I'm possibly missing someone, but 3 players who open things up for them. Joey Carberry as well, another player who, when on his day, can open up a game for you. And they didn't really replace it. I know Takir Abrahams gives them something, but he can't do it on his own. And they haven't improved their lineouts, and that's partly down to the fact that their forwards coach left midway through the season, and the person who replaced their forwards coach is double jobbing with the women and in Alex Codling, and it's not high performance, and you're not giving yourself that much of a chance. But still, if you're a Munster player, you can't really blame the coaches when you're going away to a Cardiff team and coming away, or you're putting yourself in a position even that you have to go to Cardiff and win with 3 games to go in the season. We're going to find out a lot about these 3 teams in the next 2 weeks, and because they all have a chance of still getting there. I know Connacht, you can write them off, but their fixtures are probably the easiest. Ulster have a serious challenge on their hands, but the way they're going, I think they'll test Munster on Friday week. And Munster, like, we saw what they can do in La Rochelle and at times in Bordeaux in that second half, but you got to do it week in, week out. You can't complain about missing out on Ireland's selection if you go and that's the best you can offer. If you're fighting amongst yourselves, if you're giving out at the referee the whole time, if your lineout's going to pieces, if you're making basic errors, if your discipline's poor, this is what it marks you down across the year. So, like, Munster should get there. I think the fixtures are nicely lined up for them, and I'd back them if they got to the knockouts to take a scalp in the knockouts as well if they get a decent draw and go a little bit deeper, because they have the quality, I think, within their best 23. But we're not seeing that quality, and I think they're underperforming. I think Ulster were always going to have a challenging year. Connacht, I just don't there's too much gone on there in the last while
Yeah.
to get there. So it's not good.
Yeah, we'll come to them in a second. So Munster, to give you the glass half empty interpretation, and by all means push back where you think fair. Like you can go into the micro currently of like the discipline problem, the line-out problems. They're all there and evident for everybody to see. But on that wider point, you take it from the URC winning side, and maybe they won a little bit ahead of schedule. But I think all of us looked at that and thought, okay, finally, after almost a lost decade, they're motoring again. And to add on to Rudd's point, Frisch, Sebo, Snyman, Carberry, mitigated a bit by Abrahams, but then the disruption of Roundtree. And so it's a lost season again. And next year, around this time of year, unless he does something remarkable, we will be saying, well, look, Clayton McMillan, he's only in his first year. It's another building year. And suddenly, well, it's like several years have been sort of lost here. And it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah. You also have the fact that a couple of their coaches are going on the Ireland summer tour, so I don't know where they're going to miss summer pre-season in terms of Mike Prendergast and Dennis Leamy. Will that overlap in terms of when Munster are actually getting back under Clayton McMillan? So it could be a little bit of a slow start. They have to sort out the Alex Codling situation. You've touched on it there, and my understanding is that they're optimistic that they'll be able to get Alex Codling in on a full-time basis, but not until after the World Cup. So Munster need to figure out what they're doing from then until post-World Cup, because the line-out is utterly shambolic. I mean, you see how good it is when it works at the weekend because they scored the Tom Farrell try. Was it under the post? But what you're seeing is like them having to throw over the back of the tail because they just don't have any confidence in throwing to the front at all, which you'd imagine is the easy ball. Now, look, obviously, when you don't have a forwards coach, it's a big issue, but the players have to take responsibility as well. Like, you've got guys like Peter O'Mahony, he was injured at the moment, but like, he's a line-out guru. Tyg Byrne is the one calling the line-out. I mean, look how frustrated Tyg Byrne was last week when he had a row on the pitch with Niall Scannell, and there's times where Tyg Byrne is carrying that team on his back. Like, where would Munster be without Tyg Byrne? And it must be deeply frustrating for a guy like that who, like, everyone else just isn't playing to that level, and you raise yourself, and I totally agree with your point, Rod. You raise your levels for a big game in La Rochelle. There's no doubt that it took a lot out of them in terms of that Bordeaux game, but that's a few weeks ago now. You got to get back to the bread and butter, and Ian Costello touched on this after the game against the Bulls that they lost. Like, the URC is their bread and butter, and now they're in danger of finishing outside of the top 8 and not getting into the Champions Cup next season, which is obviously a disaster. But I was having a look back at the press release when Munster confirmed that they're going to play a Champions Cup pool game in Porky Queeve in December, which would be great for the province. You'd imagine it'll definitely be a sellout, a big payday, but the caveat to that is it has to be a Champions Cup pool game. It's no use if it's a Challenge Cup game, because that will be played in Thomond Park. So there's so much going on for Munster at the moment that they don't look well coached, I would say, at the moment as well, which is a bit of an issue. They've put all their eggs into the Clayton McMillan basket, which I can totally understand why, but they're sort of coasting and almost waiting for him to come in and uproot a few things in terms of the culture and add a bit of his flair. But it's not just this season that will be a lost season if they're not careful. A season in the Champions Cup would be dire for Munster in terms of trying to attract players as well as the finances.
So this will boil down to a large extent to the game against Ulster in 2 weeks' time at Thomond. Ulster, they have tries in them, and Stockdale looks to be playing very well again. It was 2018 all over again with his chip and chase. They take leads quite a lot lately and then they lose them. Admittedly, the Sharks are talented when they put their minds to it, so it's understandable-ish. So, in effect, Ulster go to Munster in 2 weeks, and it's a quasi-playoff for a Champions Cup next year.
Yeah, it's pretty much the first knockout game of the season. Well, sorry, they played European knockout games. The first one, URC knockout game. And I think Ulster don't have a 23 as good as Munster's, but they have players who look, despite the fact they've lost their last 4 games, there's a confidence about some of the stuff they're doing, particularly Zach Ward and Jacob Stockdale on the wings. Isichukwu is starting to really fulfill some of that potential that we've seen, so that we kind of all thought was there the last year or two, and he's really a dominant force. But they don't have, I don't think, as strong a 23 as Munster. But they won't have any fear going down the road, and that's a big thing that Munster have lost. I know they're not the force of old, but Thomond was still deemed to be a pretty tough place to go. And the fact that they're at home in their last 2 games of the season, although one of them's in Cork, isn't it? The last game of the season will be O'Mahony's final game, potentially. Well, it's certainly his final game in Cork against Benetton in the last game. Ulster have a chance, but Munster should be seeing this out. They should be going to a knockout game, potentially in South Africa, but all with a real chance of going and doing something because they're good enough to do it. And they should be setting things up for Clayton McMillan to come in and succeed next year, because they have gone and recruited one of the most highly rated coaches in the game. I'm surprised really that he's not bringing anyone with him as far as we can see in terms of players. I mean, Pat Lam comes over, he brings a couple of kind of the Auckland Blues or Bundy Aki he brings with him, and a couple of others. Miles Moyena signed initially as well. You kind of expected when McMillan comes over that he might bring a one or two with him when he's coming over. Maybe there'll be announcements in the future.
I've heard in the grapevine they're looking at a tight head.
Yeah.
And now that the RFU have relaxed the ban on overseas tight heads, that's something I think they'll look at. Obviously, Stephen Archer is finishing up at the end of the season. They're still waiting for Roman Salanoa to fulfill his potential. I understand he had a pretty serious setback in terms of his recovery from an injury, so I'm not sure when he's going to be fit either, but I think they are looking to possibly get a tight head. Now, you kind of go back, I always go back to Andy Friend's comment that he said to us a few years ago that Connacht are shopping in Brown Thomas and they're shopping in wherever else, and there's definitely a bit of that going on as well, because I don't know what kind of budget Munster have to go to the market and get probably a tight head that they need. Now, to be fair, they did get Ollie Jaeger as well, but we're probably still waiting for him to fulfill his potential too.
Yeah, but their squad I think will be better next year. Well, they're losing Omani Murray, which is a lot of experience, but they're not, they're probably towards the end and they're not really contributing across the season. They're bringing in Dan Kelly. Milne looked really good on Friday on his debut. Barron will improve them, but it's not. They're not exactly going and getting Frisch, Zebo, Carberry, and Orgy Snyman. It's still not as strong, but they are getting a very good coach. So they just need to get themselves in a position where they can have a crack at the playoffs, and also then that they can give Clayton McMillan the best chance of succeeding. And some of their rivals, I mean, two of the Welsh clubs have to go to South Africa, so it's not a foregone conclusion that everyone in the top 8 wins their last couple of games.
Connacht mathematically can still pull off a miracle. They're at home to Edinburgh, away to Zebra. So again, that sense of a very messy year off the pitch, scuppering things massively. To what extent has this all been resolved? Do we know how they shape up ticket-wise?
No, it's not resolved. Pete Wilkins, it's been confirmed, is gone.
Yeah.
And we don't know how they're replacing him. I suspect Rod Saib, the senior attack coach they announced a couple of weeks ago, will step up, although I've been told that's not confirmed. Collie Tucker is kind of running the show as well.
What kind of personality is he? Because you think Connacht in recent years, not to lean too much into the cult of the coach, but that underdog aspect to Connacht, you sort of need an inspirational figure to knit it all together, I feel. Like a presence. Pat Lam had it. Andy Friend in his own way had it. Never really felt Pete Wilkins had it.
No. Kieran Keane did not have it, which
was the opposite.
A disaster.
Yeah.
So they need to be careful.
They need somebody, Clayton McMillan type that you say, okay, you can hang your hat on that and make up for your lack of finances and other issues.
When you look back to when 2015, 2016, David Nucifora talked about how Joe Schmidt will be replaced from within the Irish system, and obviously ultimately it was Andy Farrell. But the options he was looking at was Pat Lam in Connacht, Rassie Erasmus in Munster, and you'd Les Kiss, who's about to take over as Australia coach in Ulster. And Leo was in Leinster, and they ultimately went for Andy Farrell from the Ireland coaching ticket. But the strength of Irish rugby, you look at the big jobs are all going to lads now, or people who spend time in the Irish system.
Yeah.
I'm not sure in 10 years' time we're going to be saying the same thing. I think McMillan has been touted as a future All Black, so that's a really progressive appointment. Richie Murphy is potentially a future Ireland coach if things go well in Ulster, and certainly that's rewarding someone who's performed within our system, and that's to be encouraged as well. Leo Cullen and Nienaber, well, Nienaber's already done it, so he's a different profile of coach. And in Connacht, I think Rod Saib is a bit of an unknown quantity. I couldn't answer that question that you asked, really, because I don't know enough about him just yet. I'm hoping when I'm in Australia for the Lions to pick up some info around him. They are bringing in Billy Millard, who's an experienced GM, to fulfill a role kind of overseeing their high performance programs. But I don't get the sense. Certainly, you don't hear. It's not like his name doesn't ring out across rugby as kind of some sort of inspirational figure. He's an assistant coach at the Brumbies, in the way that Lam. I know Lam had been damaged by his Auckland Blues experience, but he was still a big figure within World Rugby when Connacht brought him in, and he was almost messianic in the way that he came in, and he broke down the way that they play. And they're a far more attractive proposition now than even they were when Wilkins took over, because the stadium's almost done, and they have a couple of senior Irish internationals now. They've a lot of the best young players coming through the system, albeit a lot of them are behind the scrum. Their squad is imbalanced to some degree, but there's still a lot of quality there, and they're definitely not as bad as they've been this season, and that's the frustration. And again, the coach paid the price, but the players are being so inconsistent week on week and losing games or even not performing within games or waiting until the game is over before they kind of launch a comeback. And they must be a frustrating team to be a fan of right now.
Yeah, okay. The weekend coming then, Leinster in a Champions Cup semi-final once again. It's Northampton. So it feels, by comparison with last year on a few fronts, less high octane. 82,300 through the gates of Croke Park last year. We're looking at 30,000.
Keen as an update.
You had a piece on that, did you?
Rod did, but the latest I heard was that it was at 33, which, I mean, from
that hasn't knocked that.
No,
you haven't blown my socks off there.
No, well, this is the point, and I think EPCR have actually released some of the cheaper batch of tickets, where they're about 30 quid, but it doesn't seem to have had the surge. And
you have to tell people
exactly. Yeah.
What was the pricing situation? I know the gate receipts are distributed amongst all the participating teams, but in terms of price points for a game like this versus the Leinster designated games, the quarterfinal, for instance?
The ones that were on sale over the weekend when kind of the frustration was hitting its peak were all 70. There's one's reappeared for 45 on Sunday into Monday, and I think the Keane was saying this one's at 30 now. There was a limited release of kids tickets. Did you say they were 42 quid, the kids tickets?
42, I think, yeah.
Which is a lot to bring your kid along to a game. There wasn't that many of them.
It should be a grown teenager ticket as opposed to a kid's ticket.
Still, like 42 quid is a lot.
And we should like absolutely make this clear that EPCR are running the semi-final. This is not a Leinster
And how
thing.
do those prices compare with a Leinster quarterfinal last 16 pricing?
They're more expensive. I'm not sure the exact price that they put them out at, but Leinster. So 2 years ago there was 42,000 at Leinster Toulouse, and James Ryan came out the day before and complained about EPCR's ticket pricing, which is rare enough for a player to come out and say something like that. And then Leo Cullen last year, when Croke Park was being confirmed, he said, "I just hope EPCR don't rip people off." Yeah. And EPCR engaged Leinster, who helped them kind of price it appropriately. So the Hill 16 tickets in particular were very, very cheap and very available, or very competitive anyway. And they also utilised Leinster's marketing channels to sell the game. This year, as I understand it, there's been no consultation on either front. And like Leinster are very good at selling tickets to the Aviva Stadium when they've got a bit of a lead. And I know they didn't get a great crowd to the quarterfinal, but they had 6 days to turn that round. They'd always say they need a couple of weeks.
And they had, to be fair, like 55, I think, at Croke Park off the top of my head for the Harlequins game. And Harlequins didn't have that many either, which was like, that's an incredible number, which was more than they would have got at the Aviva as well. So they are very good at running it, but I think it's important to make it clear that it's not Leinster who are pricing their fans out of it.
It still, to me, is very small, and considering the magnitude of the fixture, I've been speaking to someone who's not going, and like they're looking at Northampton and going,
well, this is the other reason it's not high.
They're the English champions.
Yeah. So last year you drew 82,000, but also you had a Northampton side who were going very well at the time, en route to a premiership.
Yeah. People still wrote them off last year.
They did.
It was only in the game where we realised actually this might happen.
Yeah.
But, like, people were talking about Northampton the same way last year as they are this year.
Were they? Okay, It's hard to remember. But it was in the end they got good fare, I suppose, in that Northampton scored the last 14 points of the game, and it was a 3-point win in the end, a nervy last couple of minutes. But this year, Northampton are 7th in the Premiership. They're eyeing up scraping into the top 4, and Leinster are a better team, and they're in the habit of pumping Premiership teams at the moment for fun.
And
62-0, 52-0.
Like, you've got 3 more chances to see Jordy Barrett play in Dublin.
Well, that's
maybe 4.
I guess that's an offering, but for €70, if you've seen him 3 times
maybe
already,
off the bench this week, but you know.
Yeah.
It's a bank holiday. That's another thing.
So for 70 quid, and you've been at the other 2 where they've pumped teams, and you want to go to the final, presumably, I can see how people are voting with their feet here.
And the final is incredibly expensive. And if we're all being honest, Leinster should get to the final. So it's hard to quibble about people trying to, save their few quid to go to Cardiff. Like I said, it was just going to be an expensive weekend. But like, sort of like bigger picture stuff, it's so wrong. Obviously we don't know what the final attendance is going to be, but let's say it's 36,000 in a 52,000 capacity stadium. It's so wrong that that's the case for a Champions Cup semi-final. And like you said, Rod, people are probably sleeping on Northampton again this year. They're the Premiership champions. I know their defence of their title hasn't gone that well, but wow, they still have the weapons to hurt this Leinster defence. So it's really disappointing from a competition point of view. And I know we've spoken about it a few times, Joe, on the pod about the future of the Champions Cup, where it's going. To be fair to Northampton, they are one of the few English clubs who fully buy into this tournament. Phil Dowson, I thought, spoke really well yesterday about it. Obviously, he has his experience as a player, because it would have been very easy for Northampton to put their focus on the Premiership this season because they were going so poorly, but they've gone all in on both, and I think we're probably grateful to it as a spectacle, but it just does not sit well with me at all if we're going to have so many empty seats for a Champions Cup semi-final.
You really have to question so many aspects of the EPCR. Like, pricing people out of this game is so short-sighted, because this is a marketing exercise too. This is a chance to showcase a semi-final in front of a full stadium, and you make people think what we all thought during the years where we fell in love with this tournament. Oh my God, this is the place to be.
It's not going to feel like that.
No.
It's going to feel like a regular URC game. And part of the problem is that Leinster play all their games at the Aviva Stadium. And it was a problem 2 years ago as well when they couldn't sell out that Toulouse game. It was the first season they moved a lot of their games to the Aviva. And by the time they were playing URC semi-finals there, quarterfinals, the crowds were terrible because people had a bit of fatigue about going there. It has a bit of a Croke Park. Like, ironically, if this was in Croke Park, there'll be a much better crowd, whereas if a GA game is in Croke Park, people don't want to go because they've got Croke Park fatigue. But
they've got that wrong, haven't they, as well? Because I was shocked. I just assumed that the semi-final was going to be at Croke Park. But again, EPCR decided to use the Aviva Stadium. Like, obviously there's, pointy heads who are paid a lot of money to do this kind of marketing and stuff. But I would have thought, wow, if you've sold out the same fixture last year, you would assume that you'd go back to the same stadium. And now they can't even come close to selling out the Aviva Stadium. There's something seriously wrong there.
And you go back to the TV deal that they ended up with the Premier very late in the day. It doesn't speak to an organisation that's functioning very, very, very highly. And Kevin Potts, the RFU CEO, was he was guarded about it, but they are not happy about what the revenue they're getting from this tournament, because they give so much. Like, Irish rugby gives an awful lot to this tournament. If the Irish fans are not showing up to a semi-final, that's pretty damaging. Like, I presume there's going to be a good crowd in France. I haven't been tracking the numbers over there for Bordeaux Toulouse, but the French crowds, there's a secret sauce over there that we're not aware of. They're getting great crowds to everything, but it's there's an element of Leinster fatigue, I would imagine. And you're right, a bit like Kerry GA fans back in the day waiting for the final. But if you priced it appropriately, and I don't know, I know there's a lot of sport going on, but I haven't noticed a massive amount of marketing for this game. There's not a lot of hype. Maybe it's just because everyone expects Leinster to win, but it does seem to be they're sleeping on it a little bit.
No, it's off Broadway. It is. It absolutely is. The Leinster team last year, by the way, Frawley at fullback, Larmer, Henshaw, Osborne, Lowe with his hat-trick, Ross Byrne, Gibson Park, Porter, Sheehan, Furlong, Maloney and McCarthy, Baird, Van der Fleer, Doris. So plenty of change there. 3
surviving backs, I'd say, in the team.
The back line's transformed. So you said there, Keane, people may be sleeping on Northampton again. The money has Leinster as 19 to 20 points favourites. What are we missing?
Look, I think Northampton's attack, which opened up Leinster a few times last season, that game might have been very different. The end result, if Ram had scored that try just before half time, when they had a beautiful move down the right and he knocked on with pretty much a clear run to the line. So they definitely have the attacking weapons to hurt this Leinster defence. Now, you've just listed out the team from last year, Joe. The team that's going to play this year, I know Rudd has a bit of a line on that we could chat about, is going to be far superior. Their defence is in a far better place, but I still think this Northampton attack has the tools. I think Sam Vesti is one of, I don't know if you could still say he's underrated, but certainly one of the most astute attack coaches in the game.
He's a good lines coach, actually.
I thought he would have been
If Quins and Glasgow together in 160 plus minutes manage 0 points, what would you guess Northampton will manage?
I think Northampton will score a couple of tries, yeah. I'd be surprised if
14, 15, 20 points territory?
Yeah, 14 maybe. I'm just going to get on to my sort of bigger point, though, is their pack is not as good as what it was last year. They've lost Courtney Laws, Lewis Ludlam, Alex Waller, Alex Moon, Josh Matavesi, or Sam Matavesi, sorry, who came off the bench as well. So will their pack be able to provide the platform for Alex Mitchell and Finn Smith to hurt? I'm not sure they will be able to. So that's why I'm kind of, a bit reserved. But I think even if they're able to get parity, Pierre Brousset is the referee. He's refed Leinster off the park in the Bristol game earlier in the season, and the Harlequins game, Slimani had awful trouble with him as well. So if Brousset starts, pinging Leinster at the breakdown, and Leinster really push the envelope since Jacques Nienarber's come down, it's a key part of their philosophy. When they get away with it, it's brilliant. But if he's hot on that, if Leinster conceded scrum penalties and Northampton are starting getting field position, I do still think that, look, it's the bulk of the English backline now. George Furbank is a huge loss, and Ollie Slidehome is a huge loss. But I think Finn Smith is an exceptional young 10. Alex Mitchell is back to his best. He was injured during the Six Nations, kind of had a bit of up and down. I think Fraser Dingwall has been brilliant in the centre, and Tommy Freeman is one of the most informed wingers in the world at the moment. So I suppose you have all these like mini Lions battles hanging over this weekend as well.
Yeah, Robin McBride conceded Slimani has gotten the wrong side of this referee twice already, and they've had conversations about it. What is your line?
Just the word is that Jordy Barrett's coming on the bench.
Well, there goes your 35,000.
And Andrew Porter probably as well, although I'd expect Porter to be on after about 20 minutes in the way that Leinster did, which I think is just such a smart play to start Keane Healy or Jack Boyle. I'm not sure which one is starting, and then you get Porter on for the more important hour of the game. So it's that's quite I'd like that innovation Leinster have brought in since Christmas. When it was the Munster game of Christmas we first saw it, but the Barrett one. Unless there's an RFU stipulation that we're not being told about, and there very much could be. Although I was told, my understanding was that there was parameters around Snyman, but not Barrett. That is an amazing selection call.
Well, it is if they lose. It becomes a crisis then of what's going on here.
Like, he was so good. I've been waxing lyrical ever since that Glasgow game. It was the best individual performances I've ever seen in the flesh.
And sorry to interrupt, it's Henshaw and Ringrose, both fit, both in.
That's what I expect. Yeah, with Hugo Keenan a fullbaght.
So what
and like Osborne might not even make the 23 because Tommy O'Brien's playing so well.
Do you now think there is a stipulation? That's the only real logic here.
I'll ask Leo on Friday, but he won't give me a straight answer.
No.
I don't see any other reason why, unless you're looking at maybe your long-term squad happiness, but that's no reason to select the team. If Jordy Barrett's part of your squad and he's as good, if he's been as good as he has been, and look, Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose, two of the best backs in the world, but Barrett on form probably is the best, and I think I don't think they could have much of a grumble about him playing if he is picked ahead of them, and I think he should start the final, and you should treat this like a final. So we'll try and get an answer out of Leinster. We've been trying. My understanding was definitely there was one around Snyman, and Leo kind of dodged. If James Ryan and Joe McCarthy are fit, he has to be on the bench.
Right.
James Ryan's obviously injured,
and they all signed up to that, and that's how they've gone for. And James Ryan's out injured, so Snyman will start. But
was that here, James? James
is nearly back, but he didn't quite make it.
Pull up there.
And again, like, he's playing so well, and when you get to a final, your main responsibility is getting Leinster over that line, and they're all, dying to get over that line. It must be severely tempting for Leo Cullen, having already got Snyman signed on for next year, to go, come here, Orgy, you're in this week. I'll take the heat off David Humphreys when he calls me.
Yeah. But imagine how Jordy Barrett is feeling. I mean, he's only here for everything here. He's a great team man and all this kind of stuff. But like you said, Rod, he's only here for another few games. This is the reason he joined Leinster, was to be involved in these big days, and he has been exceptional.
Well, this is the thing. He's delivered. So it's not like, oh, listen, our shiny new signing, we know he's not quite firing, but we're paying a lot of money for him, so we better start him. Like, it's kind of inarguable, even though he hasn't started as many games as a typical player of the season might. He is their player of the season. He is almost on form, not just the best centre, potentially the best
he's the
player
European player of the year,
the Northern Hemisphere. Yeah. So to not start him, like, is it a touch complacent? Like, you wouldn't do this in the final, I presume.
Well, not if the stipulation is there,
and if there is a stipulation, then Barrett would have been aware of that coming over. And I think Leo Cullen, one thing he's good at is communicating this stuff to the players. But he'd be baffled by it, I presume, because what more can he do? Again, unless there's an injury that he's been carrying, he didn't play last weekend. But
even if the stipulation,
if everyone's fit and you're picking your best team, which any functioning team should be doing. I know the Irish system's a bit strange in that the RFU have central control. Then Snyman and Barrett should start every game, and really that should improve the Irish players, because they need to be better than Jordy Barrett and RG Slime if they want to play for Leinster, and that is elite sport. You sign these players, I think you should play them. I think it's a bit silly to have these parameters put in place. It's box ticking, and it could cost Leinster dearly, because if Northampton I don't expect Northampton to beat Leinster at the weekend. I think Leinster will be comfortable even without Jordy Barrett. But if Northampton start really well, get ahead, and Jordy Barrett suddenly comes in and Leinster are 15 points down and trying to chase the game, having not chased the game all season, well, I know what we're going to be talking about here next week.
I've just come from the Aviva Stadium as well, where in the players' tunnel they have a huge poster, and Finn Smith is on one side, Jordy Barrett's on the other. So I'd say when he's walking into the dressing room off the bus at the weekend, he'll probably be a bit annoyed, because obviously, you know, we talk about the marketing now. This is in the tunnel. Obviously, supporters can't see it, but he is the, pardon the pun, the poster boy. You know. And
you know this RG Snyman stipulation.
Yes.
Is that like your journalistic sources, or was that ever expressly revealed to you by officially?
It came through sources, but there were high level sources, and I mean, you've heard that as well, Keane. I mean, like, that's the story.
My point is, it wasn't like a Leinster or IRFU email officially announced to the media.
No. And when I asked Leo Cullen directly about it, he said that's a personal matter. And then I asked the further question, he said that's a very personal issue, Rory.
Okay.
And I can't remember what the third answer was, but he definitely wasn't getting into it. He didn't deny it.
Right. Okay.
I'd be interested to see what he says about Barrett if this proves to be true on Friday. I presume he won't answer a direct question about it.
But you'll know by his non-answer.
Well, you can draw inferences from it, certainly.
I asked him about it in the build-up to the Quins game. I think I'm right in saying he was on the bench as well, because he came off and he was so good in that game as well. And what Leo said was that he understands his role.
One more wrinkle on this stipulation, which we're never going to get official information on anyway. I think if I was the Leinster CEO or Leo Cullen negotiating with the IRFU, I would say, okay, I accept your stipulation, but I get one game. As in, there's going to be a Saracens or a Toulouse or that.
And this wouldn't be
historically. I get one game where I get to veto that, and this is not. And
maybe
the game.
There is that.
So in the final, if he plays and everyone's happy, then you would say that was a carefully crafted, well planned out stipulation.
We speak so much about how good the Irish system is, and everyone controls the players and all that, but this is an example where it really clashes, because the best thing for Leinster this weekend, and obviously it looks like James Ryan is out, so the Snyman one kind of looks after itself, but the best thing for Leinster this weekend, not for Ireland, is for Jordy Barrett to start, and that's where the sort of friction come in. And over the years you would have heard like different things about Leinster, the RFU maybe button heads over a few different things, so I don't know if that's kind of softened since David Humphreys has come in, but it's one is good for Leinster, one's good for Ireland, and it's a bit of a
and in fairness, they started him in the quarterfinal, so maybe the deal is that it's one every two.
Were the two boys fit then?
Yes, Henshaw came off the bench in that game. Okay, wasn't it Rennering? That's what I remember.
Anyone coming back from injury though?
No, they were all fit.
Because again,
like Osborne's missing out in games, and Osborne's one of the most promising young Irish players in the system. Now, he started the last 16 game, but I think it would be a bad call if they played him in the right wing ahead of Tommy O'Brien, who I think is apart from Stockdale and Tommy Freeman, the form winger in Europe right now, and a few in France that are pretty good as well.
The fact that he found himself in Scarlets last week playing in the centre, I'd say probably
Osborne,
you would imagine both as well.
I think Tommy O'Brien will start, so like he'll miss out, and that's a hugely, he's the one. I think he's the big loser of Barrett coming over, really, because he's missing out on places in the 23. But I guess the message to him is, this is the level we need you to be at if you want to play for Leinster. But like, I'm sure he didn't greet Rico Ioane coming over with open arms either.
Yeah, okay. I think we've talked that one to death enough, or have we? It's very interesting.
It is.
I think the Lions matchups are absolutely fascinating. It's basically the last audition before the squad is announced next Thursday week. Andy Farrell will obviously be there in the stand. You've got the scrum halves, the out halves, like Sam Prendergast, Finn Smith. I just think is a fascinating duel. They're both 22 years old. They've both had breakthrough years. Tommy Freeman up against James Lowe. Probably not so many in the pack. I think Ulster fans will also be watching. Pollock, of course. Pollock is definitely worth talking about how we got to this stage, and I hear in the grapevine that Andy Farrell is a big fan of Henry Pollock. If anyone hasn't seen him play, he's an exceptional young player. He started out this season playing for the English 20s, broke into the English senior team by the end of the Six Nations, but he's not shy, and I would imagine the likes of Josh van der Fleer, Caelan Doris, and if it's Jack Owen in the back row, would love nothing more than to put a few manners on him. We were talking to Finn Smith yesterday, and he was saying that himself and Tommy Freeman are practicing their celebrations during the week in training. Which, look, I have to admit, I don't really mind it. But the swan dive that he did last week in their win, Northampton's win over Bristol, I was just thinking, wow, this will go wrong someday. It was just totally needless. But he brings a serious bit of colour as well as being an exceptionally good player. And I would imagine, look, you'd probably say that Andy Farrell has most of his decisions already made, but if he comes over to Dublin this weekend and plays well, wow, I think he's definitely in the bolter category for next week.
So Farrell will name a squad in 7-8 days time. What Thursday, is the Finn Smith, Sam Prendergast out half state of play at the moment?
It all depends on the Owen Farrell question, isn't it? Like if Owen Farrell doesn't go,
he's going.
Well, then it might be a choice between them, because I find it difficult to see Andy Farrell playing Finn Russell in test matches for the Lions, but I also find it very difficult to see him leaving Finn Russell out altogether. I think that
he couldn't.
I mean, he could. I think Andy Farrell is very much his own man, and if he doesn't think Finn Russell is the right man, and he sees Prendergast and Smith as far more aligned to what he wants to do, and he had, I think he'd love to see, Owen Farrell work alongside Prendergast, and I think Smith will benefit from that as well.
Johnny Sexton's a big fan of Owen Farrell as well, which he's going to have a say in it too.
And I'd say he likes Finn Smith as well. Yeah. We know he doesn't like Finn Russell that much, so
and he definitely likes Sam Prendergast.
And I do think the Scottish players are all on a bit of a. I mean, you probably should have knocked off Ireland at least once in the last 10 goes if you wanted to go on the Lions tour. Like, if you keep coming out of the wrong end of those battles, it's going to count against you in Andy Farrell's mind. But Smith, was he the best 10 certainly of the British and Irish 10s in the Six Nations? He probably was. Prendergast did loads of stuff right. Farrell obviously loves him. He knows the system. I find it hard to believe he won't go at this point, especially the way he's playing in Europe.
Richard Wigglesworth is part of the coaching team as well.
Yeah, that would be a big factor. Yeah. So I think they've both got a really good chance. If Smith plays really well on Saturday, I find it hard to believe they'll leave him behind. And they're two exceptional 22-year-old players, but Lions Test 10s are usually not 22-year-olds.
No, it's true. So then you're looking at Farrell, Finn Smith, and then you're like Prendergast versus Finn Russell. When I said he couldn't leave off Russell, like, I get the Sexton point. I do get the flash, not my cup of tea, not a test match animal. But like, he's good enough to go on a Lions tour, isn't he?
Yeah,
definitely. He should be. I mean, he was brilliant in the third test in South Africa 4 years ago.
Like, that 20 minutes was the most, this is what could have been moment on that Lions tour.
And Owen wasn't great on that tour from a memory.
He could pick Owen as a 10-12 kind of hybrid and still have the 310s, maybe. If you're going with, like, you'd imagine Bundy will be there as a 12 and Sione Tuipulotu. You could have Owen Farrell as that 10-12 and still have 310s, maybe.
Yeah. It just depends on how he balances it, but it's one of the more wide open areas.
Interesting.
And really, I mean, Andy Farrell keeps himself to such a degree that no one knows. Like, we'll only find out on Thursday when I presume it's Ian Evans reads out the names on the sheet, and the Owen Farrell question hangs over it all. If it's Finn Russell, Finn Smith, and Sam Prendergast, I think that would, if you're picking on the Six Nations 10s, that would make a lot of sense. I don't see them bringing Marcus Smith, especially the way that Harlequins Leinster game went.
The Russell, Finn Smith, Sam Prendergast, if you don't have Owen Farrell in the squad, looks to me a little callow.
Yes.
And so, like, the argument for Owen Farrell is very strong.
Yeah, and you don't have a lot of repeat tourists. There's not a lot of guys who go. If you go back to the 2017 squad, there's very few of them that are still around.
And I wonder, look, I don't want to sound arrogant, but Australia are not South Africa and they're not the All Blacks. So I wonder, is there a little more scope maybe from Andy Farrell's mind to bring 3 players of that profile? Because, like, let's be fair, I know like Australia have made massive improvements and I think people are writing them off maybe too easily, but the Lions should be too strong for
It's also a fast track. I mean, the weather will be better than it will be in New Zealand. You like, a Finn Russell could really thrive behind a dominant pack in Australia, so he could suit their game down to the ground. But again, I can't see Andy Farrell putting his faith in this guy. You know, he built on. I keep going back to the fact that he's worked with 2 10s in his coaching career, really, for the vast majority of it, and it's Owen Farrell who he basically built into the player that he is, and Johnny Sexton, who he is so tight with that he's bringing him on this tour with no experience. So you're looking at that's the profile of 10 that he wants, and then you're looking at the guys that are out there, and I just don't see Russell fitting that profile, but maybe he'll surprise us. I know there's already accusations that this is being used as an Ireland development tour with the 2027 World Cup in mind, so it could be Jack Crowley, Kieran Frawley and Sam Prendergast.
And Finn Russell behind an utterly dominant pack. Like, that Lions pack is going to be so strong.
With Tuipulotu and Jones potentially outside
you know what I mean? So like it could work, but I can understand where you're coming from at the same time. But to me, it's unimaginable that Finn Russell wouldn't be in the squad.
I mean, that'd be... So sorry, maybe it says something about this match that we've gone off in all these different directions. Leinster to win is the prediction in the room by
21 points, I think, is the.
Yeah, it's come into
that looks big to
19.
me.
It's come into 19.
I think Leinster will
They
keep
must
the
have
score
heard
down.
Rod's exclusive news.
I'd say something like 35-12. Something. Is that 25 points? It is, isn't it? Or it's 23 points. I think they'll make a real battle out of it, but Leinster have a very good way of keeping the scoreline down, and they've enough weapons to get their own score up to the ledger up. I don't see this Northampton team having the strengths to beat them. I think their ultimate test will come, and this is not an original thought. I mean, lots of people are saying this, but will come in 3 weeks' time when it comes down to a weakened Toulouse team who've just lost Vaca, or Bordeaux who just lost to La Rochelle last weekend.
I do look forward to May 20th when their season can start.
And
Do you agree?
And people will show up. Yeah, no, I do. I mean, obviously they're on the better side of the draw, but they earned that in terms of their seeding from the pool stages. And we had this a few weeks ago, Joe, when we were chatting, and like there's just, until Leinster deliver on a big day, there's just, going to be a nagging doubt in the back of my mind. Their defence is far better than it was last year. Their squad, their starting team, you mentioned Vaca being out injured. Look at Toulouse's injuries, already without Dupont. Blair Kinghorn is injured as well. But he's back actually. I think he's due to be back this weekend possibly. But you look at their injury profile and then compare that to Leinster, who James Ryan might be back this weekend, and other than that, look, Jordan Larmour's out, but they're well covered there. It's remarkable how much in good stead Leinster are. So it definitely feels like, we've said it before, but it kind of feels like not now or never, because their profile of their squad is good, but the stars are very much aligning now.
And they didn't impress during the knockouts last year. They're actually their most impressive performance of the European Cup last year was the final, when they almost wrestled the game back into their own control through their scrum and Frawley obviously had to kick to win it, but in the Northampton game they weren't impressive, in the Leicester game they weren't impressive. They've been far more impressive this season during the regular season.
Though,
poor opposition, but like Leicester weren't great last year and they struggled in that game. I know the scoreline was good, but their attack never clicked last year. The defence never looked that convincing because Nina Aber came in midway through the season. The players were broken by the World Cup experience. There was definitely a confidence issue. I think they're in a far better place this year. Last Saturday would worry me a little bit. That I was very encouraged for Leinster point of view that the South Africa tour went so well, and that even without the stars, the rest of the squad were pulling in the right direction. That was the kind of performance that undermined them last year. So that's a bit of it. I'd say they looked at that as a bit of alarm bells were flashing at that hasn't been happening all year. So have things dropped off in training, but they should have enough this week.
Just to mention that Les Kiss news that Rory alluded to earlier, he's going to be the Australian head coach from mid-26 into the home World Cup in 27.
Joe's just clinging on that a little bit longer.
They've presented this as a great thing.
Is he going to be here for the World Cup? Just stay on. Just stay on.
Well, the way the Australian Union have presented this is like, this is perfect on every level, because Les Kiss gets to see out his contract at the Reds, so there's minimal disruption there. And they've billed this as, we get an extra 14 Joe Schmidt tests than we thought. There were 17 promised. We get another 14.
What's another 14, Joe?
So it's an orderly transfer from Schmidt to Kiss. They obviously work together. So that's what they're doing.
They also didn't have to pay compensation to the Reds, which was a big part of that deal as well. Yeah.
Now they can spin it any way they want. Look, maybe getting Joe Schmidt for an extra.
I can see Joe being involved in 2027 in a consultancy role. In fact, I'd be very surprised if Joe isn't involved. New Zealand, yeah. And like him and Les was his assistant with Ireland, and they've long established relationship. I'm sure they're working fairly hand in hand there, and Joe's a habit of kind of staying involved even when he retires.
Okay,
it's happened before.
Okay. The Women's Six Nations reached its conclusion in a disappointing way for the Irish team. England beat France by just a point in the end. Like, it was very dramatic. They were kind of pegged back by France at Twickenham, but won out by a point. So England's dominance continues. For Ireland, it was a very disappointing finish, in that third was already guaranteed. They had to play the Scots in Edinburgh. The Scots had only won one game against a very poor Welsh side in round one, and so the expectation was that, well, Ireland will rubber stamp this third. It will be a more impressive third than the previous year, and they duly lost 12-7 down at half time. Should have been ahead, sucker punch twice, and then got away from them in the second half. I guess the mitigation, and it's probably fair enough, is that it was, a chaos out there. They had lost Aaron King already. Sam Monaghan not involved. But then Dorothy Wall injured and now out for the World Cup with an Achilles. Aoife Wafer was missing as well. Then Adele McMahon went off with a HIA. So there was a degree of carnage on the pitch. And it's probably exposed at the same time some shortcomings in their squad depth. But given where they were coming from just a year or two ago, to expect them to have fixed everything at this stage is maybe a little premature. That said, it's kind of it's a meh, kind of a 2 wins, same number of wins as Scotland. So we all feel there's an improvement which has happened, and you can see it, but it undercuts it a touch.
It's because they ended on probably their worst performance of the tournament, and the fact that Scott Beamond, I know he brought in Aoife Corey at fullback, and Jane Clossie made her debut off the bench as well, but by and large he stuck with the same team, which absolutely I can understand. But I wonder, like, was there any temptation to try and even bring a few more players in to try and build that depth, Joe? Because look, I don't want to be too negative, but I mean, to lose players of Erin King and Dorothy Wall's calibre for the World Cup, I'm not sure if Ireland have the strength and depth right now to be able to cope with that. Absolutely massive losses. Yeah. I mean, Dorothy Wall's ability to play in the back row and the second row, she adds so much ballast to the pack as well that we probably in this country haven't produced a lot of athletes of her sort of profile. So that
kind of back in her best form.
That's it, yeah. Like, she got to move to England as well, playing at a high level. And like, obviously from her point of view, it's devastating, but it's devastating for Ireland as well. I think from like just chatting to a couple of people in around the squad, the Erin King injury kind of really hit them, hard. She's 21-year-old, kind of the world at her feet. And Dorothy Wall isn't too far behind in terms of that. So it's really disappointing to have finished the Six Nations with such a poor performance, but also with such disastrous injuries, because I think that's really going to be detrimental come the World Cup.
Yeah, like if they're looking at a World Cup semi-final, then they will either in the pool stages have to beat New Zealand to get a relatively smooth quarter-final, or assuming they don't beat New Zealand, they'll have to beat France in a quarter-final.
Who they should have beaten in this year's tournament. Like they started. I hope they're not explaining it away in terms of the injuries and the chaos, because you're supposed to be able to deal with whatever comes at you in the games. I'm hoping that the
initial sense was I got from the players was, well, look, we dealt really well with the chaos. I thought it was a pointing to that as the
Scott Beamon seems like a straight talker as well. I've been really impressed with him.
I unfortunately they've invested hugely in this program, financially and also with resources in terms of personnel and all that sort of stuff. But the player base is still very thin, and a World Cup is to lose two starters before World Cup is very worrying, because you're going to lose players during that tournament as well, and there's just not enough players to fill those gaps. If they needed their luck to hold, to back up the really good work that's gone on there, to back up their improvements, and you'd be concerned about them now. You wonder if they might come back to some of the retired players like Nicola Friday or something like that to try and bolster what they've got, because they've lost a couple of players who are still in the right age profile who've stepped away young. I mean, Dorothy Wall, it's going to be very hard to find an athlete who can fit her profile in this short period of time. So it's a setback. It's a real setback, and they have warm-up games to get through before they get to the World Cup, and they can build momentum again. But it's a real check to them that if they don't they have to get it right. They have to keep getting it right. They can't take it. They haven't got to a point now where they can take it for granted. The hard work has to keep going. So maybe we look back on it as the perfect time to lose a game that you're expected to win.
Yeah.
But
the injuries.
It's the injuries more than the sort of performance, isn't it? It's just, yeah. It's very disappointing.
But even the way they weren't happy with the Wales performance either, and the France game wasn't great. So when you look back on it overall, 2 from 5, they would have expected at least 3, and they were going for 4 really, weren't they? So it's a disappointing campaign, but it's the less important of the 2 campaigns they've got this year.
Yeah. As an aside, you mentioned Aoife Corey from UL Bohemian, who won obviously at the weekend, and Jane Clossie as well. Like Fiona Hayes, I mean, Aoife Corey had been put up to do media duty on the Wednesday, I think, because Fiona Hayes, her coach, she's playing. She's been my fullback all year, and then Scott Beamond pulls her up last minute, and Jane Clossie as well, and they play for Ireland. Given how few really high quality games there are for so many of the female players in this country, they should find a way to not have AIL finals clashing with a Six Nations game. There's enough room in the calendar.
I was talking to Fiona last Wednesday, and yeah, she didn't know what her team was going to be for the weekend, which is that has to be sorted going forward, because I think structurally, like you've kind of touched on it there, Rod, like so much good work has gone into women's rugby, but there's still a long way to go as well. The AIL, is that fit for purpose in terms of preparing players for international rugby? I think that's definitely up for debate, but it's the kind of Celtic Challenge as well that they're playing in, which it certainly isn't going to prepare players to, particularly in a World Cup here. So I think there's been great work done, but like there's an awful long way to go, I think, both on and off the pitch. I think we saw that at the weekend as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, we don't see these players. Like these players, they're on TV for 5 games in a year. And I mean, it was unfortunate in a way that WXV was in Canada, so it was in the middle of the night and it wasn't on TV. But really, we're building towards a World Cup, and I still don't think the greater sporting public have connected in any way with these players in this team, and that's partly because they're not accessible in the way that Munster, Leinster, Connacht and Ulster players are in the men's game, and even club players like the UL Bows, the people of Limerick who support UL Bows should have been able to go out and support the Ireland players for their team and have a connection with them in a final, and I'm sure it was a great honour for the players to be pulled away, but I'm sure there was a part of them that was tugging at their heartstrings as well, having been there all year. So it's not, we talk a lot about the Irish system being aligned, but it's not aligned with the club game in any way. The club game is very much disconnected from the pro game, and the women's game is pro now. The Celtic Challenge seems to be progressing, but there may be benefits to it, but in terms of commercially, it makes no connection with fans.
Too many blowouts as well. Like
loads of blowouts.
And the AIL is like that as well. You're seeing clubs drop out.
Teams, Suttonians have pulled out this week, and even it's not elite. Like there is elite. Like UL Bows and Railway Union are both really well run, really well coached. They are able to, when they play against each other, they are really high standard games. But they will tell you themselves that too often during the season they're not playing against good teams. They're getting walkovers in certain games. It's not like this should be a higher level. Like John Cronin, someone I talked to, he's in Railway Union, and he's written about it in the Sunday Independent at length in the last couple of years about what he thinks it should be the model is a franchise model with based around universities to kind of link in players of high performance to the top game. But no one's listening to him. What would give me some hope is that Lynn Cantwell's coming into the RFU now, having worked in South Africa, hugely respected by everyone within the women's game and the men's game, and I would hope that she's able to give, having played for UL Bows, I think herself back in the day, and seen the benefits of a strong club team, and also excelled with Ireland, the most capped player. I hope that she's able to and is given the political capital to go and align things, because if they're only seen on TV 5 times a year and they're going into a World Cup and no one's really making a connection apart from maybe Aoife Wafer, well then how are you going to sell it to sponsors and take people with you? And
this is also why players are moving over to the Premiership, and who could blame them? They're playing at a far higher level. Look at Darty Wall.
Wafer could go now as well.
But why wouldn't she? I mean, she's going to get far greater opportunities, far greater exposure. So yeah, like I know real downbeat there, but I have by and large been encouraged by the I suppose the forward movements that the Ireland have taken over the last year to 18 months. And I think Scott Beeman kind of at the head of that. And to be fair, since Kevin Potts has come in as well, he's put a big focus on it too as the RFU CEO.
Yeah, it's all the investment in the top level has been really good, but they need to come up with the structures beneath it to keep feeding players into it, and that's where the disconnect is. And that scheduling the final the same weekend as the Ireland game and last Six Nations game just speaks to that lack of kind of joined up thinking when it comes to it, and it's the performance versus the participation side, and they haven't fixed it. That's one of the things they haven't got right with all the investment they've put in. It's definitely in a better place than it was 2 or 3 years ago, but there's way more that needs to happen.
Okay. Fellas, we'll reconvene next week in some shape or form. Keane Tracy, Rory O'Connor, thanks a mil.
Cheers, Joe.